if you have to clarify that, you might be picking on him. Maybe we need to rethink some of the times that we use those phrases. I want to think about a particular phrase that falls in this JK. I can run off to my mom and tell on me. What would I do? Or maybe you've experienced this as an adult. You tell somebody a joke, but you can tell they start to get upset, and you say, look, just because we say JK or just kidding doesn't make something okay. So when we're joking, otherwise we would never. Proverbs 26, verses 18 and 19 says, like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death. So is the says what his response is. Look, it was just a joke. I was only kidding. Was I not joking? Is what he says. But in verse 18, what does it say about this man? What does it call him? It says he's like a madman who throws firebrands, arrows, and death. The point is that even though he was just joking, if he really were, that did not take the weight out of his statement or his actions. They still mattered. And I think part of the point of this passage is that what he had done was still destructive and it was still hurtful. So what I want us to be thinking about this morning and consider is our joking. Because it does matter. I think we realize as Christians, all aspects of our lives are to be transformed by Christ. Well, that means that the way that we joke and the way that we kid around needs to be transformed as well. So I want to focus on three main things. The first is what we joke about. The second is how we joke. And the third is how often we joke around. And I want to say this before we get into it. I may say something like this again, just to be clear. The purpose or the goal of this lesson for us, for everybody and myself included, is for us to exercise caution and to use biblical wisdom in the ways that we joke. The goal of this is not to say you're never allowed to joke. It's not to exclude all joking. Because there's a blessing in that, right? There's a blessing in humor and laughing together. Sometimes we need that kind of relief. So you're not allowed to leave here and say, Sean said we have to be boring, we can never tell a joke or laugh at anything. That's not true. That's not what the point of this lesson is. It's for us to be cautious, to be wise, and to be transformed. So let's go ahead and look at this first one, what it is that we joke about. Look at Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5 is where we're going to look at first to get this idea. Ephesians 5, verses 3 through 5. In this text, Paul says, but immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you as is proper among saints. And there must be no filthiness and silly talk or coarse jesting, which are not fitting, but rather giving of thanks. For this you know with certainty that no immoral or impure person or covetous man who is an idolater has an inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. So you look up there in verse 3 in the context of this. And he talks about these sins, immorality and impurity. He's talking about sexual sins and greed. And what does he say about those things? They should not even be named among Christians. I like the way another version says that. It says, not even a hint of those things. And we get that. Those things are horrible. Those things are sinful and bad. You drop down to verse 5, and what is the punishment for those who engage in these things? He says that an idolater, an immoral person, or a covetous man has no inheritance from God. That's a big deal. If we are living in those kinds of sinful lifestyles, we can expect no inheritance from God. That's the point that he's making with this text. But we have these big ideas. Couched in the middle of them is verse 4. And what does verse 4 say? He says that the ideas of filthiness and silly talk and coarse jesting, there should be none of that among us as Christians. He's talking about the way we communicate, but more specifically, he's talking about the way that we joke around. So what does it mean? What does it mean, this idea of foolishness, silly talk, and coarse jesting? You know, a couple synonyms that maybe help us are obscene, foolish, and crude. So he's talking about dirty jokes, or joking about sinful things. And I think it's helpful for us to recognize that this list in verse 4 shares the same punishment of verse 5. If we are engaging in these kinds of things, then that's the same punishment of no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God. So I think it's pretty obvious. There is no place among Christians for us to joke about sinful things. That just shouldn't be a part of the way that we communicate. That shouldn't be a part of the way that we kid around. But unfortunately, the world doesn't hold that standard, does it? I mean, it's going to be all around us in this world. The world likes to joke about worldly things. So that means that if you're at work and your coworkers aren't Christians, what are they going to joke about? They're going to joke about sinful things. And if you guys that are still in school, man, I feel bad for you guys. I've been there. But it seems like school is one of the worst places for this. I remember in middle school and high school, I don't know what it is about that, but they want to joke about things that are sinful. So we're going to face it in those places too. And it means that our entertainment, most of it comes from the world. So what are they going to laugh about? Sinful things. That means that when we look at our phones and social media, we get on the internet, my point is we're going to be bombarded by this because the world likes to joke about sinful things. And the unfortunate thing is that oftentimes Christians jump right in there with it. Sometimes we join in with the world in making those jokes about sinful things or in laughing along when they do. And what we need to do is we need to be determined that we will not joke about things that are sinful. I mean, think about it. These are the things that sent Jesus to the cross. We should not be taking those things lightly. And beyond that, we need to make sure we don't join in by laughing about them. I think this is probably the harder part. Maybe I wouldn't initiate joking about sinful things, but if I'm in a group of people or I'm watching a movie and they make that kind of joke, I'm more inclined to laugh along with it. And that's not okay. That's not something that we as Christians should be engaged in. That conveys just as much approval as making the joke ourselves. It is hard because it's awkward. It's awkward if you're the only one not laughing along when somebody else tells a dirty joke. But that's just not what we need to be doing. So what's the big deal? Why does this matter? I was thinking about this beforehand. I think there are two reasons in particular that I thought of. One is for ourselves personally. Think about what is our attitude supposed to be towards sin? Passages like 1 John chapter 2 and verse 15 tell us that we cannot love the world and love God. We have to choose. So that means that our attitude towards sin needs to be, we hate it. But it is hard to hate something that you're laughing about. It is hard to fight temptation when we're taking it lightly. And so it is going to affect us as Christians if we are engaging in this kind of joking around. But it's also going to affect others. One of our roles as Christians is to be lights in this world. But how confused will people be if we say that something is wrong and then they hear us joking about it? We're going to send a mixed message to people in the world. We need to be different, and this is one of those ways that we need to be different. So maybe that means that we have to get rid of some of our entertainment, some of the things that we watch or that we look at. And that probably means we need to be more bold in standing up among people that are in the world, or even sometimes among our Christian friends, to not be willing to joke about these things. I can think about a lady when I was growing up. I did not like spending time with her. Now, she was a really kind and wonderful woman. But the reason I didn't like being with her is she convicted me. Whenever there was a group of people together, if somebody would joke about something that was inappropriate, we'd all be laughing. But she was the one who wouldn't laugh. And in fact, if it were inappropriate, she was willing to say, we shouldn't be laughing about that. We shouldn't be joking this way. Man, I hated that. But you know what? I needed it. We need people like that in our lives, and we need to be those kinds of people that are unwilling to joke and to laugh about sinful things. So that's the what. That's what I want us to be cautious about as far as what we joke about. Next is how we joke. Think about this question. What is the goal of the speech of a Christian? What is our goal every time that we speak? I think you can probably answer that question from a number of passages. I want you to look at Ephesians 4, verse 29. It's just one page over for me, maybe on the same page for you. Ephesians 4:29 says, "Let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification according to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear." So he tells us first that no unwholesome word should proceed from our mouth. Those things should not be in our mouths. And then he gives us the inverse, what our speech needs to be like. And our speech needs to be good for building up and for giving grace. In fact, he says that those are the only kinds of words that we need to be using. So that means that every time we speak as Christians, our goal is to build up, and our goal is to give grace. Now, I recognize there are times that this looks different. There are times that when building somebody up, you need to have a hard conversation with them. There are times when we need to tell people what they don't want to hear, and they may not like it. But in the context of what we're thinking about with joking, what I'm thinking of is one of the ways we joke is by picking on other people. And that's the opposite of building up. Sometimes we do that knowingly, and sometimes we do that unknowingly. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But these are the times that we take jabs at other people verbally, and these are the times that we make them the butt end of a joke, things like that. And so why do we do that? We justify ourselves by saying, it's not malicious. I don't mean anything by it. I'm just joking. But it can have consequences that we don't expect. And I want to share a story with you. This was impressed on me several years ago. So several years ago, quite a few. Actually, I was with some guys from a Bible camp. We weren't at Bible camp, but that's where I knew them from. And we were all Christians, and we were spending the night together, having fun, hanging out, playing video games, things like that. So it was a really enjoyable time. But one of the things that we did throughout that night is we started to mess around, and we started to joke around with each other. And sadly, one of the ways we did that was by joking about homosexuality. And if I'm being honest, I think that's a pretty common thing among guys of any age group that get together. They joke about that. And we've already talked about this, right? We should not have been joking that way. That was sinful. That was wrong just in that way. But it had unintended consequences. There was a friend of ours there, and we had no idea, but he was a Christian struggling with that temptation. And I didn't know. None of us knew. He hadn't shared that with us. Later that night, he shared with us that he struggled with that temptation. He was fighting it, but it was hard. And as he did, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I realized that entire night, that very night, I had been making jokes that were hurtful and that pushed him away from us. Because what was the message we sent him? Unwittingly, we sent him the message of, we make fun of people like you. We sent him the message that we find your struggles laughable. Did we mean to do that? No. If we had known, would we have done that? No. But that's the danger in this. When we joke around and we're picking on people, we don't always know the consequences that will come from that. Because we don't always know the struggles in somebody else's life. We don't always know their life situation, and we don't always know the things that they're sensitive about. And so we run the danger of pushing people away when we joke like this, of isolating people away from us. And this is not just a problem for immature teenage guys. This is a problem that goes throughout all age groups and in all circles where we like to do this kind of thing. So we need to be determined that the way that we joke, we will be careful and we will be caring and godly in the ways that we joke around. Remember, what is the goal of our speech? The goal of our speech, according to Ephesians 4:29, is to build up. So we must be determined that we will not joke in ways that tear people down. We need to be cautious in the way that we joke. So those are the first two things, what we joke about and how we joke. Last thing I want us to think about is how often we joke. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I want us to consider it. And I want you to evaluate for yourself, how much of your communication is joking around? So let's say we're not joking about sinful things, and we're not picking on people in ways that are hurtful, but how much of your time and your energy and your words do you use in a way that is just making jokes? Because if the balance is shifted, if we're spending more time doing this and more of our energy doing that than doing things like what we've read about building up and cultivating deeper relationships, then I think we need to shift the way that we talk to different things. I was talking about this with several people beforehand, and a couple of people mentioned, I think this is helpful, sometimes it shows a deeper relationship with somebody when you're willing to joke around with them. I tend to joke more with the people that I'm closer to because I feel like I can do that. And that makes sense. That's helpful. I agree. But at the same time, one of the consequences that can come is that if our conversation is dominated by joking, then we're missing out on the depth of a relationship God has designed for us. Because we're just keeping this relationship at a shallow level where we're only joking and we're not digging deeper. Maybe a couple passages will help with this. Look at 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 14 up here on the screen. It says, "We urge you, brethren, admonish the unruly, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with everyone." And so what do we need to be doing? We need to be admonishing, encouraging, helping, and being patient according to this passage. And another one, James 5, verse 16 says, "Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. The effective prayer of a righteous man can accomplish much. So in this passage, I think we see what we need in these passages, what we need to be doing with our time and our relationships with each other. We need to be admonishing. We need to be encouraging. We need to be confessing and praying for one another. Those are the kinds of things that need to dominate our conversation. But it's easier to joke around than it is to admonish. It's easier to cut up than it is to confess. But we have to be determined that we are going to make these things the focus of our communication, more so than joking around. Are these two ideas, and I want to make this clear, are these two ideas, joking and building up, are they mutually exclusive? No. They can coexist. But what we need to do is give the proper weight and balance to the things that are more important as Christians. So, we need to be determined that first, we will not joke about things that dishonor God. And secondly, we need to be determined that we will only joke in ways that are careful and that are caring. And then finally, we will focus more on building each other up spiritually with our communication. That's what we need to be doing as Christians. And I told you I'd tell you this again. This is not saying that we can't have fun, that we can't joke around or do things like that. That's not my lesson. But my lesson is to encourage each of us, including myself, to be cautious, to be wise, in fact, also to be bold in standing up to others, and to be transformed in the ways that we communicate, and particularly in the ways that we joke. So hopefully these things are helpful for us to think about as we look into God's Word and see what He has to say about these subjects. That's all that I have for us this morning. We haven't really talked about the gospel in the sense of if somebody wants to become a Christian. But if somebody does, if somebody has a desire to put on Christ, we want to help you with that. And we can help you with that. And if somebody has a desire to confess and to seek the prayers of this congregation, we would love to help you. Let us know if there's anything we can do as we stand and as we sing.
Someday you'll stand at the bar on high. Someday your record you'll see. Someday you'll answer the question of life. What will your answer be? What will it be? What will it be? Where will you spend your eternity? What will it be? Oh, what will it be? What will your answer be? Sadly, you'll stand if you're